The first thing this mom said to me was, I don't even know what to take away anymore. He doesn't care about anything. She was talking about Ben, her 6-year-old son. So let me tell you about Ben. Ben is really smart, but such a handful. He is the kind of kid who jumps off the couch to see if he can land without falling. He blurts out nonsense words in class. He interrupts constantly, and he doesn't even seem to either notice or care when people get annoyed. He might even hurt people, and it seems like he doesn't care. And when you tell Ben to do something, it's almost like you just gave him a challenge. He'll do it again 5 seconds later, and he'll look you right in the eye and see what you're going to do. He wants to see what kind of consequence you're going to give him. And I'm telling you, so far, consequences haven't seemed to really matter. You can take away the toy, you can cancel the play date, you can remove every single privilege, and he just shrugs it off and he'll tell you he doesn't care. From the outside, this looks like willful disobedience. And to be honest, often it is. He can be defiant and he will push limits. But he does know what the rules are, but this is where it gets a little more complicated because Ben's ability to stop himself from acting out on a bad impulse is very limited. And he has no ability to reflect on what just happened. He is just not there developmentally. He's not a bad kid. He's actually a really sweet boy, but he is very emotionally immature, like really immature. And then when you combine that with this brain of his that's brilliant but needs constant stimulation, and his nervous system that's always running hot, and then a body that never slows down, you get this confusing mix of a boy. You get this boy who seems smart enough to know better, but he keeps doing things that don't make sense. And the problem is that traditional discipline so far hasn't seemed to really work. Part of this is because he is so impulsive and he is underdeveloped in his regulation skills. You really cannot punish a child into maturity. So what do you do when nothing seems to work? First, let's not confuse intelligence with maturity. Sometimes Ben seems like he's this little adult. He can argue like you wouldn't believe, but he is nowhere near that emotionally. He doesn't even reflect the way you think he should. He doesn't seem to feel guilty the way you wish he would. So trying to tuck him into having insight right after a meltdown is basically impossible. Let me walk you through a few strategies that actually will make a difference for kids like Ben. First, stop thinking in terms of what to take away. Ben doesn't need more losses. He actually needs more support. He needs more directed and guided support. Ben needs structure and supervision and predictability. In fact, the more structure and predictability, the better. He needs somebody who will stay ahead of the problem instead of reacting after the fact. In fact, I really can't overemphasize enough how important structure and predictability is for a boy like this. So this might actually look like breaking the day into short chunks. You can use timers, you can set transitions, you can set up expectations clearly and then review them before things get off the rails. It's always going to be better for Ben or children like Ben to know ahead of time what the next little part of his day is going to look like, at least as much as you can. I actually think this will help a lot of kids. It helps give them a good sense of what their own daily schedule is going to be like. So on any given day, you might say, hey, we're going to do A, B, C, and D at these times. And then between C and D, you're going to have some time to play with or do whatever you want. And when you do this, nothing then is a really huge surprise to him. You end up avoiding the I don't know what to do reactions because it's all mapped out ahead of time. This kind of predictability can calm his nervous system. And boy, does he need consistency. When I talk about consistency, I mean consistency that is as reliable as gravity. Here's what I mean. If you drop a rock, it will fall to the ground every time, right? That is gravity. And that is the level of predictability that we are aiming for with kids like Ben. So for example, if he talks back to his mom, if he bullies a sibling, a consequence is going to happen as predictable as gravity. Every single time you will apply it calmly and quickly with no drama. Perhaps it's a timeout. If you're not home, then that timeout still happens when you do get home. But this kind of follow through builds security and it tells him that the world makes sense and I know what to expect because this is what happens every time I act this way. If you're going to try to change a behavior using discipline like a timeout, the consequence has to be immediate, predictable, and absolutely consistent. You cannot just do this once in a while. It has to be like gravity, just as predictable as gravity is. And since we're talking about timeouts and consequences, they can never be rewarding. So if Ben gets sent to his room and he just plays with his toys, that is not really a consequence. If he's yelling and bouncing around off the walls, jumping on the bed, all that is more stimulation for Ben, and it's not really a timeout. It's kind of like having a recess. I think a timeout needs to be boring. It needs to be unpleasant. There's nothing for you to do during that timeout. That is the whole point of a timeout. So I'll give you an example of my life. When our son was little, this is many years ago, he would often act out in church because church was pretty boring for him. And so when he came home, we would make him sit on the piano bench or a music stool, and his arms had to be folded. He had no toys and he could not talk to anybody. And we set the timer for 5 minutes. That's all it was. It was 5 minutes of sitting on the bench being bored. But it worked because it was quiet and just uncomfortable enough to reset him. If he acted out during that time, we would add another 5 minutes. Sometimes he got himself up to 20 or 25 minutes. For a 6-year-old, 5 minutes is usually plenty. But if they act out during that time, like if they yell or they get up or they're refusing, then you can just add another 5 minutes. And like with my boy, at first, he's probably going to test your limits. He may rack up 30 or 40 minutes like my son did the first few times. But I promise you that will not last, because once he sees that you are consistent, his testing will stop. So be very, very predictable and consistent. Even when you're tired, the boundaries you hold have to be real, even when you're worn down. Also, just pick the big battles. Don't get stuck fighting every little thing. So focus on the stuff that really matters to you. For example, with Ben, what really matters to his mom is that he's not allowed to bully a sibling, he's not allowed to be disrespectful to parents, and he's not allowed to be destructive at home. Sometimes he would do that to yank their chains. He would hit the walls or he would break things to make them mad. Now, these are non-negotiable battles that you must win. And any time one of these behaviors occur, there will be a very unpleasant and very predictable consequence. Kids are actually a little bit like puppies with a new fence. When you're starting to make these changes, they're going to check every inch of that fence for any weakness, any hole in the fence. They're going to push the boundaries. So expect that. Just expect that at first, they're going to see what happens if they break the rules. But this is the key. Once they figure out that there are no holes, once they see that your boundaries are real and firm and consistent as gravity is, then they will stop checking. Then they'll settle in. Then they'll start to play inside that fence. And this actually brings kids a lot of security and peace and even happiness. I always tell parents that boundaries equal happiness for kids. So when your child starts testing you, that doesn't mean they're really being defiant. That's just kind of what they do. They're looking for those holes. And so you have to follow through. And once they know you will follow through, then they'll get in line. All right, another thing to do is to teach them self-regulation, just like you would teach any other skill. So kids like Ben do not learn by being told, they learn by doing. You have to teach these things very concretely and explicitly. You might even create a visual menu or regulation options like squeezing a stress ball, chewing crunchy snacks, jumping on a mini trampoline, using noise-canceling headphones, or going to a calm corner with a weighted blanket. You can also script through common situations in advance. So like if he feels overwhelmed at a birthday party, he can call you and he can tell you that he needs a break. These are the kinds of things that you do in advance that will actually really help him. You can also do really simple breathing techniques like smell the flower, blow out the candle. Just practice these things when he's already calm, so these skills are easier to use when he's not calm. Another really cool strategy is teaching him how to recognize his body signals before he melts down. So you could say, I notice your voice is getting louder and your fists are tight. What do you think your body is telling you right now? And then you can help him connect that awareness to his regulation menu. Should we try the stress ball? Should we take some deep breaths? This is just building his regulation muscles that he doesn't have yet. Another thing that is important is making sure that connecting with this child, because that is everything and it has to happen daily. Daily connections. You have to be dialed into kids like this. Kids like Ben desperately need positive attention and connection with you, even though they often struggle in knowing how to get that appropriately. So this means you have to be intentional about creating it. So find out what he's really genuinely interested in. It could be something like Pokemon. I used to be a therapist of little kids and I knew all the Pokemon characters because it gave us something to talk about. It could be Harry Potter. Read the Harry Potter books together, just whatever he's interested in. If he loves building things, sit on the floor and build with him. The key here is really following his lead and showing real interest in his world. If you do this even just a little bit consistently, that'll make a big difference for him, especially because kids like this often connect better through activities than through talking. So instead of constantly asking him how he feels or asking him how his day was, just play a board game together or do a puzzle and the conversation will happen naturally. There's a cartoon called Bluey, and the dad in Bluey turns everything into a game. And doing that always makes things take longer, but it works for kids like this. So this dad turns brushing teeth into a race, grocery shopping into a mission, and even mundane tasks like walking through a museum into goofy adventures. He's actually engaging and connecting with them in such creative ways. And this is important for kids like Ben because these kids have such busy minds. Try to make connecting moments happen throughout the day. This could be playing a game with him in the car instead of just asking him to be quiet while you're driving. You can gamify situations when you're out and about, especially when he's likely to get restless. So like in the grocery store, you could say, hey, can you be the shopper? Or can you help me find this item? Kids like Ben cannot tolerate boredom. So if you don't keep him engaged, he's going to look for attention in negative ways. You can be guaranteed of that. Also, these moments of connection are often the best prevention for behavior problems when they happen consistently throughout the day. This is where you're building trust and you're building emotional fuel that he can draw from later. Another idea is to praise Ben or your child as much as you can. This actually really matters for kids like this. These kids need a ton of positive attention, way more than you think. So any behavior you can praise, do that, even if it's small, and do it a lot. You have to be genuine, of course, and you don't have to make a huge deal out of everything. But you can just drop in and say, hey, I saw how you stayed calm when your brother knocked over your blocks. That was really awesome of you. Or, hey, I noticed that you used your quiet voice when you asked for a snack. That actually made it easy for me to hear you. Just praise in random ways as well. Another important thing to consider is that you as the parent need to stay calm and emotionally steady. And I know how hard that can be. When Ben gets dysregulated, he does not need more energy coming at him. He needs containment. He needs to borrow your calm. So while you're applying consequences, your job is to stay warm or neutral, not angry, not sarcastic, not emotionally reactive. If you do explode, that just pours more fuel on the fire. But when you keep your tone steady and your presence is grounded, it makes it easier for him to come back down too. Ben was at a splash pad and got a hold of a water gun. He started spraying it in the face of a couple little girls, and they did not like that, obviously, and they started to cry. And this is something that's actually really typical for Ben to do. And they were crying and asking for him to stop, and he didn't stop. So his grandma, who was watching him, got up, walked over behind him, and without even him seeing her, she took the water gun out of his hand and handed it back to these kids' mom. Then she told the mom, please don't let my grandson have this water gun again. And then she walked back, didn't say anything, didn't say a word to Ben. 45 minutes later, when they were leaving, he came up and said, Grandma, why did you take that gun away from me? Well, he knew, but now he was more open to hearing about it. And Grandma told him, when someone says stop, you stop. When you're playing with a little girl or little boy and they ask you to stop, you stop. This was a moment that she could teach him. That wasn't the moment while it was happening, not during the meltdown, but it was after when the window was open. This is when Ben had become more curious and he was actually listening. Finally, my last suggestion is to know when to get help if you're trying these strategies and you're still feeling really overwhelmed as a parent. That's actually really normal. Kids like Ben can be exhausting. You don't have to figure this out alone. So a pediatric psychologist or neuropsychologist can help you understand exactly how your child's brain works and what specific strategies will help them the most. An occupational therapist can address sensory needs. Family therapist who understands these kinds of kids can give you tools and support getting help and getting your child what they need to succeed. And all of that will be really relieving for you and it'll get you the support that you need. If Ben sounds like your child, then I want you to try this. Choose one situation this week that usually ends in punishment. And instead of taking something away or punishing him, step in with support and structure the environment, anticipate the trigger, and coach them through it. Then come back and make a comment about what you did and what actually worked for you. That can help other parents who struggle with their children as well. You can explore more free resources or my full parenting course at drtoddtalks.com. Subscribe on YouTube, follow my podcast, or share this with a friend who's in the trenches as well. All right, I'll see you next time.